Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking something that honestly gets misunderstood a lot. See, when most people think about Old Testament law, they just picture this dusty, archaic rulebook filled with harsh judgments. But what if we completely flipped that? What if we viewed these dense, ancient texts as profound, intricate systems of social justice, human dignity, and above all, grace? Today, we're going to take a really close look at exactly how the ancient Israelites ordered their lives, their society, and their relationship with the divine.
So what do ancient altars, the American Liberty Bell, and your much-anticipated weekend have in common? I know, it sounds like a totally random riddle, right? But I promise you, there are some incredibly surprising modern connections hidden right inside these ancient Israelite laws. We're going to decode exactly how these seemingly ancient rituals are actually still echoing in our modern lives today.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the cost of sacrifice. Second, the gift of Sabbath rest. Third, sabbatical and jubilee years. And fourth, the three pilgrim festivals. Let's kick things off with Section 1, the cost of sacrifice. We're starting right in the thick of it, the gritty, intensely physical, and deeply personal reality of ancient worship. Our foundation for the explainer today actually comes from the academic insights of Dr. Elaine Phillips's lectures on Old Testament literature. Her notes expertly unpack these biblical legal frameworks, and they really help us bridge that gap between ancient ritual and historical reality. Okay, let's just totally myth-bust the idea of mindless animal slaughter right now. This was absolutely not a detached process where you just dropped an animal off with a priest and walked away. It was incredibly tactile, and it carried a massive personal cost. The worshiper had to bring a costly animal, something of real, tangible value to them. Then they actively placed their hands on the animal's head, symbolically transferring their sin and identifying with the creature. And step 3 is crucial here. The worshiper killed the animal. It was intentionally designed to be a messy, sensory reminder of the sheer horror and personal cost of sin. Only after all of that did the priest step in as a mediator to sprinkle the blood. You know, the offerings weren't just a one-size-fits-all deal either. They had burnt offerings for daily atonement and specific sin and guilt offerings covering unintentional mistakes. And, this is key, intentional wrongs, like cheating a neighbor. There were also peace offerings, which ended in this joyful, community-wide meal and gratitude. But here's where we see this beautiful rhythm of grace built right into the system. God included strict economic provisions. For those living in poverty who couldn't afford a lamb or a goat, they were allowed to offer doves. In fact, first-century archaeological evidence shows massive dove cotes in the Judean hill country, specifically dedicated to providing affordable sacrifices for the poor. Moving right along to Section 2, the gift of Sabbath rest. So we're transitioning from the gory, physical cost of sacrifice to a deeply liberating rhythm, the weekly rest. The Sabbath is famously one of the 10 Commandments, but the biblical text actually justifies it in two distinctly profound ways. In Exodus 20, the command to rest is anchored in the grand design of creation. God rested on the seventh day, literally building this rhythm into the fabric of the cosmos. But flip over to Deuteronomy 5 and the justification shifts. It commands rest because God redeemed the Israelites from bondage in Egypt. They used to be slaves who literally couldn't rest. Now their freedom is defined by the absolute, non-negotiable right to take a day off. Now, a really crucial point is understanding why later religious leaders took the Sabbath so seriously. You've probably heard about the Pharisees from the first century and their super strict rules. According to the Mishnah, which recorded these long oral traditions, there were 39 specific categories of prohibited work on the Sabbath. While it's super easy to just dismiss this as mere legalism, we have to look at it neutrally through their historical lens. The original Torah mandated the death penalty for breaking the Sabbath covenant. So they weren't just being difficult, they were desperately trying to build a protective fence of rules around the community to save them from some incredibly profound consequences. But then Jesus steps right into this heavily regulated environment with a massive, radical reframing. The Sabbath was made for humankind. He was essentially reminding his audience that the Sabbath was fundamentally a joyful gift. It was designed to rescue humanity from the anxious drudgery of endless work. By frequently healing on the Sabbath, he established that preserving human life, doing good, and caring for human dignity absolutely transcend the strict boundaries of the day's regulations. Now for Section 3, sabbatical and jubilee years. Let's zoom out from the weekly schedule to these massive, multi-year societal rhythms. This is where the ancient text outlines a truly breathtaking vision for environmental and economic justice. See, the concept of Sabbath rest didn't just apply to humans, it applied to the actual earth and the economy. Every seventh year, known as a sabbatical year, the land was to lie entirely unplowed, granting it an environmental rest. Simultaneously, all debts within the community were to be canceled, offering massive economic relief. And fellow Hebrews who had sold themselves into servitude to pay off debts, they were to be set free. The overarching socio-economic goal was crystal clear: prevent the creation of a permanent underclass by building a mandatory social reset button right into the calendar. And if you thought that was big, things get even bigger with the Jubilee. This happened every 50th year, right after 7 cycles of 7 years. The term Jubilee actually comes from the Hebrew word yuval, which refers to the trumpet or ram's horn. Just try to imagine the sensory storytelling of this moment, a great horn blast throughout the ancient land, officially signaling the start of a year where not only were slaves freed and the land rested, but family property was returned to its original ancestral owners. And hey, this brilliantly answers that weird riddle from the beginning of our explainer. This biblical mandate from the Jubilee year, found in Leviticus 25 verse 10, says proclaim liberty throughout the land. That exact quote is literally what's engraved on the American Liberty Bell. It's a direct, undeniable link between ancient Israelite socioeconomic law and our modern concepts of freedom. So, what actually justified this massive redistribution of wealth every 50 years? Well, Leviticus 25 gives this steady, unyielding drumbeat. The land belongs to the Lord. The Israelites were essentially taught that they were merely tenants on God's land. This theological concept actively prevented the rise of greedy, permanent monopolies, and it ensured that an economic disaster for one family wouldn't permanently rob their future generations of land and livelihood. And our final stop, Section 4, the 3 Pilgrim Festivals. Beyond the weekly and multi-year resets, the ancient Israelites actively forged their national and generational identity by traveling to Jerusalem 3 times a year. These 3 major ancient educational celebrations have an incredible lasting legacy. Passover commemorated the redemption from Egypt and serves as the historical root for Easter. The Feast of Weeks, or Shavuot, celebrated the giving of the Torah at Sinai, and it correlates directly to the Christian Pentecost. Finally, the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkot, recalled the Israelites' wilderness journey and the harvest, a tradition that's still heavily celebrated today. These festivals were highly interactive reminders of their shared history. Now, God demanded that all men appear before him to remember their national redemption, which is recorded in Exodus 23. And you weren't supposed to show up empty-handed either. But even here, we see these amazing provisions of grace. As shown in Numbers 9, if a person was away on a long journey or maybe ritually unclean from coming into contact with a dead body, God provided a grace period. He literally gave them a second chance to celebrate the Passover a month later. These ancient festivals really show us how physical, visual traditions plant the reality of redemption deep into a community's memory. Dr. Phillips shares this compelling personal anecdote from a modern Lutheran church to illustrate this perfectly. On Maundy Thursday, the church would cover the statue of Jesus with a dark purple veil, representing death and mourning. But then, on Easter Sunday morning, a trumpet would sound and the veil was dramatically ripped off. Even as a child, a sensory liturgy like that leaves a massive emotional impact. And that is exactly the way the ancient pilgrim festivals were designed to educate generations of Israelites. Okay, check out this absolutely mind-bending historical parallel. Traditionally, the Feast of Weeks celebrated the giving of the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai, which was an event marked by the sheer presence of fire. Centuries later, in the New Testament book of Acts, pilgrims are gathered in Jerusalem precisely for this same festival, now called Pentecost. And what happens? The text describes the Holy Spirit descending in tongues of fire. It's this brilliant full-circle moment where historical theology connects the ancient law of Sinai straight to the dawn of the early church. So, as we wrap up the explainer today, I want to leave you with a pretty provocative question. We've seen how the ancient Israelites were commanded to weave grace into the very fabric of their society, from the personal cost of daily offerings to a fiercely protected weekly rest, all the way to massive national cancellations of debt. If the ancient world demanded rest for the land and systemic economic forgiveness, what rhythms of grace are we completely missing in our relentlessly busy modern lives today? It's definitely something to think about the next time you're looking forward to your weekend. Thanks so much for exploring with us, and we'll catch you in the next one.